Thank you all for joining us for today's final session of the Arab-Israeli conflict course. Today's session will focus in on Israel and Lebanon, 2006 to 2021, Israel and Syria, 2000 to 2021, and Israel and Iran, 2000 to 2021. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, my name is Ellen Resnick, and I'm the Educational Programs and Outreach Manager at Classrooms Without Borders. At CWB, we know that our work is a communal effort that stretches far beyond our small team. We are ever inspired by the outpouring of emails and personal letters we receive from all of you. We thank you and look forward to a brighter future wherein we work together through collaboration and communication among our participants to create a world of Classrooms Without Borders. And of course, this program, Avi's Arab-Israeli conflict course, is our commitment to our mission and vision, and we're able to design programs such as this. Please send any questions you may have directly to Avi via the chat feature, and he will do his best to answer with them all. Avi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ellen.
You got it.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see everybody here with us. So I'll speak the obvious, even though it doesn't directly, although I'll relate to it as well. It doesn't directly relate to our subject this evening. As all of you are probably aware, we're going back for our fifth election in 3 years. The so-called change government has collapsed in slightly over 1 year. It's not a big surprise to anybody in Israel right now. If I don't remember to talk about it at the end of my talk here, then somebody's welcome to ask a question about how this can impact the different subjects I'm going to talk about. So let's jump straight into it. On the 15th of January, 1991, we had a major change in the strategic threats that Israel was facing. And from the 15th of January, 1991 till today, we've been trying to get our act together to deal with the new threat. Those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, the 15th of January, 1991 is when our good friend Saddam Hussein decided to shoot Scud missiles on Israel as a response to the fact that the United States decided to take him on. I'll remind you that in August of 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and there was a 6-month ultimatum that was issued by the United States. They had to pull out of Kuwait. And that was over on the 15th of January. The United States went in, and already that first night, Saddam Hussein, it was nighttime in Israel, shot the first Scud in Israel. So what I'm talking about now is the fact that one might make the argument, I'm going to make the argument, actually, not one. I'm going to make the argument that Israel's biggest tactical threats are incoming missiles. These are also our biggest strategic threats, and potentially also our biggest or only existential threat right now. So within this context, we're looking at two primary rivals or enemies that have shot missiles at us in the past or have used proxies to do so in the past. And here I'm relating to our good friends Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And I'm speaking now of our even better friends, the Iranians, who haven't directly shot missiles at us, but have actually used Hezbollah in southern Lebanon as a proxy to shoot missiles at us. So today's session is not going to be exclusively about missile threats, but missile threats are a significant piece or part of the story, which is why I'm opening with this. So getting right down to it, ladies and gentlemen, I'm actually going to start with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. As you can see with my cursor, I've got my cursor on the Gaza Strip here. Let's just remind ourselves of a few things before we step forward with this. Hamas basically is going to take over the Gaza Strip in 2007. However, we started to have projectiles and rockets. Please note I'm not using the term missiles yet. Projectiles and rockets, very, very primitive ones, being shot from the Gaza Strip into Israel proper, starting from 2001 as part of the Second Intifada. And that was being done under the auspices of the Palestinian Authority, meaning that we were getting shot at by Hamas, Fatah, and the Islamic Jihad. And as I said, these were short-range, primitive projectiles and rockets. This begins in 2001. when Israel pulled out lock, stock, and barrel in 2005 out of the Gaza Strip. And when I say lock, stock, and barrel, I mean Israel pulled up all of the 18 settlements and the some 9,000 settlers and all the army bases and so on and so forth. Within 3 days, we had rockets being shot at us again from within the Gaza Strip. And here we're talking about the Palestinian Authority was at least nominally in charge at the time. As I mentioned before, in 2007, Hamas is going to be taking over violently, taking over the Gaza Strip, and they've been in charge ever since. Our first major altercation with them is going to take place in 2008, where they're going to be shooting a significant amount of rockets into Israel. We went in with boots on the ground. We did not yet have a significant defense system at the time. Not that many Israelis were killed by the rockets, and I have to address that in a moment. But in 2008, we did not have any kind of missile defense system in place to deal with it. And generally speaking, we had to go in boots on the ground and until we tamped down the violence against us. Let me stop for a second and explain why it is that we did not have, with all the rockets that were shot at Israel, a lot of Israeli casualties. And this takes us back to January of 1991, with the Scud missiles being shot at Israel. One of the big takeaways in Israel from the first Gulf War, where we had upwards of 40 Scuds being shot at us, was that we had to start protecting ourselves. And so two things actually are going to take place this time. The first is that we put in place new building regulations, which meant that all new public buildings had to have structured into them what's known here as safe spaces, which is a fancy way of saying basically rocket-proof, if there's such a thing, but basically fortified safe spaces within shopping malls, office space, what have you, new buildings, new private homes, any residential structures also had to have, every single apartment had to have a place where people could actually get to very, very quickly that had secure, safe, fortified places. And so already starting from the early 1990s, this is going to take into effect. This is number one. Number two, we already had a pretty decent early warning system in the first Gulf War, but we're going to improve it dramatically over the years. When I say improve it dramatically over the years, I can tell you that between 2008 and 2012, we'd improved the early warning system so dramatically that in 2012, it was not on the level of the city, but rather on the level of neighborhood. Let me explain. In the first Gulf War, when Scud was being shot at Israel, everybody was told to get into a safe space if there was such a thing. Okay. Same thing. 2008, it was regional. By 2012, it was on the level of the neighborhood. And I remember that very clearly from Jerusalem. There were parts of the city that had alarms going off when missiles were shot in close proximity. In other parts of the city, nobody heard any alarms whatsoever. So anyway, we made the early warning system became more and more sophisticated. So as I said, we had more and more safe spaces, secure fortified spaces that people could get to in enough time. And we also had an early warning system. Over time, Hamas dramatically improved the projectiles, got their hands on missiles, which were more accurate and had heavier payloads. This is especially due to the fact that in 2012, you had the election of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. This is after the collapse of Mubarak's regime, the so-called Arab Spring. And we had al-Mursi, who was a representative of the Muslim Brotherhood, who becomes the head of state. And of course, the $64,000 question at the time was whether Egypt was going to abrogate the peace treaty that had been signed in 1979 with Israel. And the reason we raised that question was that the Muslim Brotherhood was promising from 1979 forward that as soon as they got into power, the first thing they do was to tear up this terrible peace treaty with Israel. By the way, they also assassinated Sadat in 1981. But in any event, lo and behold, al-Mursi did not abrogate the peace treaty with Israel because the Egyptians did not make peace with Israel because of our pretty eyes, but because they had their own national interest to do so. Hamas made a big error in 2012, figuring that the Muslim Brotherhood, which is their, if you will, mother organization had their backs, and that was not in fact the case. In any event, we rolled out in 2012 for the first time Iron Dome, which is a very sophisticated missile defense system, which proved itself already in the second conflict with the Gazans, with Hamas in 2012, proved itself to be 83% effective. And in fact, we did not have to have boots on the ground going in. So to make a long story short, as I said, Hamas has missiles of different ranges. At this point now, we understand they have missiles that have a range that would take them, if you look at my cursor, from the northern edge of Gaza all the way up to this area. You have in red. At this point, this is much of Israel. It's not the whole country, but much of Israel is within range of their missiles, which actually, it has to be said, don't have very heavy payloads and are not particularly accurate, but they do have a missile capacity. By and large, their numbers of missiles they have are not that great, evidently. And Iron Dome evidently is an effective system that can deal with this particular challenge. Moving right along, I'm showing you here a map of Lebanon. The map I'm showing of Lebanon is showing you the basic religious ethnic mosaic that makes up the country. You see all this color coding is not to make the map sexy, but rather to show you just how many different religious ethnic groups, most of which do not get along with each other, make up this actually tiny country. It's even smaller than Israel. Be that as it may, all of you are aware of the fact that Hezbollah, which officially was created in 1982, is a proxy of Iran to be utilized against Israel. We had several altercations with them. And what we do know is that Hezbollah has in its arsenal today somewhere between 100 and 150,000, I'll say that again, between 100 and 150,000 missiles, some unknown number of high precision, GPS guided high precision missiles, some unknown number of missiles with very heavy payload. Let me explain the operative meaning of these two sentences. First of all, we're talking about missiles that the very accurate ones could hit Israeli infrastructure, army bases, air force bases, and so on and so forth. We're talking about very highly accurate missiles, not the whole 100 or 150,000, but some unknown number of missiles. Heavy payload is significant because, with all due respect to the safe spaces that we've created here, a heavy enough payload would overcome them. I mean, if you dump a whole building on somebody, the safe space is not going to save you. Okay, I'm not saying that cynically, I'm saying that seriously, and therefore, with all due respect, they do have some unknown quantity of missiles that could overcome our safe spaces and that are quite accurate. So this, of course, is not the doomsday device, because this is not an existential problem for Israel, but it is a strategic one. As you can imagine, it would be completely unacceptable to us if we were to have thousands or plus civilians in Israel to be killed and our industrial infrastructure, economic infrastructure to be destroyed as well. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, our understanding is Hezbollah has missiles that cover the entire country. In other words, all of Israel is within their range. One of the things Israel has been doing now for years is to try to interdict, I'll speak more about this later on, is to interdict the acquisition of Hezbollah of more precision guidance for their missiles and the heavy stuff itself, and to prevent them from actually creating their own homegrown missiles. And we've had some various successes, but it's very hard to actually quantify just how successful we've been. In any event, what we have, and this is very important, you have in front of us right now, is we have a multi-layer defensive shields over here to protect us against the incoming missiles. On the shortest range rockets that might be shot at us either by Hamas or Hezbollah, we have Iron Dome. As I mentioned, in 2012, when it came into existence, it had 83% accuracy. At this point, we're slightly above 90%. So it's gotten even better. The big problem with Iron Dome is that initially, When we first rolled it out in 2012, each missile that we shot to shoot down incoming missiles, you have to understand, it's like hitting a bullet with a bullet. Each missile at the time cost $100,000. Today it's down to $50,000, but you have to understand that the missiles being shot at us are a few $100s. What I just said makes absolutely no economic sense whatsoever. Okay, but this has been our weapon, our defensive weapon of choice, because this is what we have. So just economically speaking, that's kind of insane. You know, taking a $50,000 missile to shoot down an incoming missile, that's a few $100s. Anyway, this is for short range. Excuse me, and we have enough battery. We probably need more batteries. Each battery is like quarter of $1 billion. The problem is more the missiles, not the batteries. The second layer is David Sling, which just recently, the last 3 years, went operational. And this is for mid-range. Let's say missiles that might be shot at us from Syria or from northern Lebanon. And finally, we have the Arrow system. Arrow 3 is a missile defense system which is meant to take care of intercontinental ballistic missiles, or really, and it's supposed to take out missiles that would, up in the atmosphere. In other words, Arrow 3 is really designed to interdict potential nuclear strike on Israel, coming from, guess where? From Iran, obviously. So this is our multi-layered system. The truth is that this is not the whole story. There are other systems that are US systems that are also integrated with the Israeli systems. Now, having said that, mind you that David Sling and Arrow 3, Arrow systems, David Sling, are joint US-Israeli developments. Iron Dome is an exclusively Israeli development with US financing, but you also have the THAAD system, you actually have, which is the American-made system. You have at least 2 or 3 American-made systems which are also integrated with the Israeli systems. Having said this, ladies and gentlemen, have to make it very, very clear that if we're talking about Hezbollah having between 100 and 150,000 missiles, that quantity of missiles, in the case of a serious altercation with Hezbollah, would saturate our system. Okay, we would not be able to take down that many incoming missiles. Okay, to be perfectly honest with you, it would saturate and overcome our missile defense system, which means the following. I believe, and this is what the policymakers of Israel have been saying now for several years, is that if Hezbollah were to actually start shooting those kind of missiles at us, and we start seeing significant civilian deaths and significant strikes on Israel's economic infrastructure, we would unleash the kind of power and force on Lebanon that we've never done on an Arab country before. We would do a lot of destruction there, because this would be unacceptable for us. I'm not saying there's any kind of relish. We have to understand that this would be a very, very bad war. And since our war for independence in 1948, we have not experienced significant civilian casualties in any of our wars. So this would also be a big change in terms of what Israel's experienced up till now. In any event, I haven't finished saying everything there's to say about this, but there's something to be added to the story a little bit further down the line, which I will get to a bit later. So getting back to I put aside now this whole issue with missiles. I think you understood that in terms of the threat of missiles to Hamas, we basically have that covered. Regarding the threat, missile threats from Hezbollah, we don't have that covered, at least not based on what I showed you right now. In other words, it would saturate our systems. Next threat that we're facing, and it starts from Gaza, are so-called attack tunnels. Hamas was already using attack tunnels in 2006. That's how Gilad Shalit, if you're familiar with the name, was actually kidnapped. They used an attack tunnel, got him to his base that way. The soil in the Gaza Strip is sand. It's basically very, very soft. It's very, very easy to dig there. The tricky part is not to have the tunnels collapse on you. And the engineers of Hamas have figured out how to do that pretty effectively with concrete. And in fact, it's not just a question of attack tunnels, but there is a complete underground city. There's an entire metropolis that's under the ground, under the Gaza Strip, that we're aware of. It's ramified, it's everywhere. And basically, Hamas can move freely underground there without detection throughout the Gaza Strip. They could also hide there. But in 2014, the issue of the attack tunnels became something much, much more acute. We discovered some 36 attack tunnels that emanated in the Gaza Strip and emerged within the fields of kibbutzim, sometimes within the kibbutz, inside of Israel. And ferreting out, identifying, and destroying these tunnels became rather quickly, in that altercation of that 51 days of fighting in 2014, became a main goal of that conflict from an Israeli perspective. And it also challenged us to deal with it, because this is the problem. Okay, if it's so easy to dig attack tunnels, it's something that's very, very difficult to detect. And essentially, what's going to happen is Israel is going to pick up the gauntlet, and we are going to create a first in the world kind of underground Iron Dome. Basically, already for the last 3 years, we finished it 3 years ago. We spent close to $1 billion to build a barrier above and below the ground that incorporates different technologies, thermic, seismic, radar, sonar, stuff I don't even know about, that not only enables us to detect the tunnels as they're being dug and any kind of movement in the tunnels, but there's also a mechanism to collapse the tunnels as well. And this has been extremely effective. It's been operational now. It's been operational now for like 5 years, but it's been completed now for about 3 years. As I mentioned, we spent a fair amount of money on this baby, and it completely surrounds the Gaza Strip. So this is basically taken away from Hamas, this tactical weapon or tool. By the way, our good friends in the north, the Hezbollah, were not sitting on their hands. They were also carving attack tunnels from southern Lebanon into Israel. Here, the terrain is harder. It's not sand at all. It's dolomite and limestone. And we also, in an operation called Operation Northern Shield, we managed to detect 6 attack tunnels that they had built. We're, in the meantime, constructing a similar barrier, or at least certain sections where they have a potential of digging tunnels. So that the entire border doesn't have that potential, but those areas that do have the potential, we also are erecting the same kind of barrier that we have around the Gaza Strip. So this is something that will be dealt with in the future. We're not finished with that, but we do have a solution to this problem. Okay, moving right along. So Hamas is never wasting time. And about 5 years ago, they began to use, what can I say, incendiary balloons and kites, meaning take regular balloons, birthday party balloons, put some gas inside them, attach, a flaming a piece of cloth that's saturated with gas, and you float it over, and it sets fire when it hits the ground. And basically what it's done millions and millions of dollars of damage to the agricultural fields of Israeli communities that are in what's known as the Gaza envelope, the area that is around the Gaza Strip. This hasn't to date cost loss of life on the Israeli side, but this has been something very difficult to grapple with. It's very hard you can't use Iron Dome to shoot this down. We were trying using drones to shoot it down. Yeah, that wasn't quite effective. So we this is something we don't have a very effective tactical defense against this. It's been some time since they've used this weapon, but occasionally it happens. But there's something on the back burner, no pun intended, that will actually be effective to deal with this. Another threat that I haven't mentioned before, but it should be a kind of obvious one, is the use of drones. The reason I'm saying it should be an obvious one, because if you're paying attention to what's been going on in the war between Russia and Ukraine, the Ukrainians have actually been using drones fairly effectively against Russian forces. So Hamas has drones and Hezbollah has drones. And by the way, we're talking about off-the-shelf drones. You don't have to have sophisticated drones that are military grade. Today, the drones you can buy off the shelf in a regular shop, any of us, can be outfitted also to drop bombs and so on and so forth. So we at this point know how to. Initially, it didn't surprise us, but it was, again, we had to figure out tactically how to take them down. And now at this point, we've solved that tactical challenge as well. Yeah, you can see the incendiary balloons and kites, as I was mentioning before. So I said we have something in the back burner. It's not yet operational, but Israel is actually constructed a very sophisticated laser system that would work in tandem with Iron Dome, which can also shoot down missiles, not just missiles, but also drones and also incendiary kites and so on and so forth. Okay, the United States also has a laser system. So what's the big deal here? The big deal here is this is all-weather system, something the United States does not have. In other words, we've managed to overcome a technical problem, which is facing everybody who's been trying to use laser systems, which was inclement weather, made it ineffective. So evidently, we've managed to find an effective solution to that issue. We're probably about 3 years away from making this operational, but it's going to be a big game changer. Why? Think about this for a second. What's the cost of a laser system? The answer is the electricity. And unlike Iron Dome, where you're shooting $50,000 missile to take down a $500 missile, okay, the laser system is going to be very, very cheap. You can also do multiple lasers. I mean, this is something you can do. You can take in a lot of multiple targets. You can take down a lot of multiple targets, okay, which is also something. It's a big game changer as well, okay? And you can use the same algorithm that Iron Dome is using. So it'll be work in tandem with Iron Dome. Once this baby is going to be operational, this can be a significant game changer. This new laser system is meant to deal with the following 3 challenges. One of which you already mentioned, just how expensive and insane it is to shoot a $50,000 missile to take down a $500 missile. So first of all, it's going to be much more cost effective, number one. Number two, it is going to enable us to take down multiple targets more effectively. So maybe it's going to prevent the saturation of our systems. And finally, it can take down the small targets that our big systems can't deal with, like mortars, incendiary kites, or balloons, and drones. Okay, so not to say this is this is going to be our savior, but I'm saying that once again we're coming up with a technical solution to this tactical problem, and it should be very significant if we get this baby rolling out operational before we have our next altercation with Hezbollah. Okay, and now let's talk about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is Iran. It's hard for us to remember right now, but up until 1979, Iran and Israel had really good relations. We had flights between Israel and Iran. We had joint infrastructure projects. We had joint military projects. Iranians were our buddies until 1979, until the Islamic Revolution takes place there, and everything just collapses. That's true also of the relationship with the United States and Iran as well. Be that as it may, it's fairly clear to us that in the last 15 to 20 years, the Iranians have been trying their best to get their hands on nuclear weapons, to develop their own nuclear weapon capability. And this is deemed in Israel as an existential threat. What's very interesting in this context is that Iran getting a nuclear weapon, and if it's open about it, and everybody knows about it, doesn't just rattle Israel, it rattles the entire Middle East. So you have to keep in mind that Iran is a Shiite power that wants Shiite hegemony in the Middle East. Facing Iran is not just Israel, but Sunni Turkey and Sunni Saudi Arabia and Sunni Egypt. Okay, in other words, we take a look around the Middle East, there are plenty of countries, Muslim countries, who are just as worried about Iran getting the bomb as Israel is. And in fact, one of the big dangers about Iran getting the bomb is nuclear proliferation around the Middle East. That's a very scary prospect if you think about what happened in the so-called Arab Spring, right? The Arab Spring, we had the collapse of regimes. Can you imagine we had the collapse of regimes and they had nuclear weapons? That's a very scary thought. And yet it's very clear that if Iran gets the nuke and comes out of the closet with it, that's going to be a bigger problem than just for Israel. But if we take a look at Israel in particular, we have to keep in mind that the real question here is whether or not Iran is a rational player. And I have to remind you that, and all of you are probably old enough to remember this, this was the big question regarding the Soviet Union, right? Are the Russians rational players? And we, the United States at the time, staked the future on the fact that the Russians are rational players, and therefore you had what's known as MAD, mutually assured destruction. And once you have mutually assured destruction, the assumption is that your nemesis or your rival is not going to use a doomsday device because they know if they do it, they're going to destroy themselves as well. And the essential idea of rationality is you don't want to be destroyed. By the way, we're back to this question again with Russia. You know that. I mean, what did Putin do in the first 5 minutes of his invasion of Ukraine? He was rattling the nuclear saber. He was reminding the Europeans and Americans that he had tactical nuclear weapons. Okay, and one could make the argument that that is, without a doubt, deterred the extent to which the United States and the EU have aided and abetted Ukraine. The aid is there, the abetting is there, but the extent to which has happened, I'm guessing, is limited also by this big question mark about whether Putin is playing rationally at this point, and rattling the nuclear saber is something that is always very scary. So getting back to Iran, the real question is, are the Iranian decision makers rational players or not? If they're rational players, then them getting a nuclear weapon doesn't change a lot. Let me explain why. I'm going to share something which is not a secret. Israel has lots and lots and lots of nuclear weapons. We don't openly declare it, but everybody knows it. We're probably one of the more nuked up players in the world, even though we have this policy of ambiguity. But more important than that, we've had for the last 20 years second strike capability. If you're not familiar with the source of our second strike capability, it's Germany. Believe it or not, Germany supplied Israel gratis, by the way. First 3 of what later on became 6 and then later on 9 of the most sophisticated diesel-powered submarines that can carry a nuclear device. In other words, at this point today, we have 6 very sophisticated German-made subs that can do it. The first 3 we got for gratis over 20 years ago, meaning if I know that we have second strike capability, so do the Iranians. Second strike capability means that if Iran were to shoot a nuclear device at Israel, and by the way, we are certainly a one-bomb country because some 50 to 60% of the Israeli population and 50 to 60% of the Israeli industrial and economic infrastructure is along the coastal plain in a pretty prescribed, dense area. And one well-aimed and well-shot nuclear device hitting that area would pretty much be kaput for us. We still have the capacity. We still have the capacity for us to strike back. Okay, so second strike capability should work as a deterrent if you're dealing with a rational player. If you're not dealing with a rational player, then it doesn't help us. And back in the day, which is not too long ago, we had our other good buddy, Ahmadinejad, who wasn't really clear, where this guy was somewhat messianic and thought that God was whispering sweet nothings into his right ear. When you have people who have God whispering sweet nothings in the right ear, then you get worrying whether they're rational players or not. And so in any event, this is problem number one. But what the Iranians have been doing is the Iranians have been trying to transfer weaponry to Hezbollah in southern Lebanon via Syria. We're talking here about sophisticated missiles. we're talking about chemical weapons. So this is something that's not news to all of you. Israel has been interdicting a lot of these shipments, the best of our capacity. We also knocked out, probably aware of the fact that last week we actually knocked out the international airport in Damascus. We took it out of commission. Okay. Evidently, even on regular passenger flights, the Iranians were sending over kits, like GPS precision kits that could be used to turn missiles into precision-guided missiles. So we did that as well. If you take a look at this map, the reason I put this up for you is to show you, and here's my cursor again, is that the Iranians, despite everything we tried to do, the Iranians have succeeded in embedding in this area. Okay, this area that I'm showing you here is basically the Syrian Golan. They have succeeded in embedding in this area Hezbollah and other, which is Lebanese, right? But also other Iranian-backed Shiite militias. In other words, we did not succeed in preventing them from embedding yet another threat, not just in southern Lebanon, but also over here in Syria, on the frontier with us in the Golan Heights. So the assumption is, which could be erroneous, the assumption is that Iran is not going to unleash Hezbollah so quickly on us because it took them years and years to build that up. And the moment that Hezbollah is unleashed, we're going to destroy that strategic weapon that the Iranians have split so much money into and so much effort into. But it's also clear that when Iran says jump, Hezbollah says how high. That having been said, one has to take into account that we're looking at two failed states on Israel's borders, and when you have two failed states, one is Syria and the other one is Lebanon. Lebanon is now also a failed state. A lot of instability in both of these. It makes it a very dangerous situation, makes it very unstable, makes it very unclear for us who the players are and what they're willing to do. So this is yet another issue for us. But again, this is more of a tactical problem than it is even a strategic one, and it's certainly not an existential one. The only existential threat that Israel perceives today, really, is Iran. I am of the opinion that ultimately the Iranians will get their hands, will develop the nuclear capability. They're probably 5 minutes from it now anyway, and for all kinds of reasons of their own, they're holding back on that. That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, I'm also of the opinion that we're going to be seeing a big shift in their situation in the next 15 to 20 years. Because despite the fact that right now, because the oil crisis that's being engineered by this war that was started by Russia with Ukraine, the trend is that we're moving away. The Western world is moving away from oil. And within 15 to 20 years, the Iranian oil and the oil of the other countries in the Middle East will be a lot less relevant. And they put all their eggs in that basket right now. So the Iranians are going to find themselves in dire straits also on that end. So on this happy note, I'm going to stop here and check out some of the questions you all have been sending to me. You're also welcome to ask questions about the elections and so on and so forth. Okay, what do we have here? Okay, just a simple short question. What is the difference in Muslim religious belief between Shiite and Sunni? Okay, I'm going to put this very, very briefly. Look, the opening shot between the Shiites and the Sunnis is right after Muhammad dies and doesn't have a clear successor. Muhammad did not have male offspring. And so immediately after he died, the question over who would succeed Muhammad broke down to two schools of thought. One school of thought said that it should be that person who embodies the best leadership characteristics, meaning the smartest, most noble, most righteous, the most just, best military leader. That person, okay, should be the new leader of the Islamic nation. And that faction or that school of thought is known as Sunnah or Sunni in plural. The other school of thought said, no, while it is true that Muhammad did not have male offspring, he had female offspring, and they married and they brought forth male grandchildren. So it should be a direct descendant of his line. and they are known as Shiite in plural. And they're going to be duking this out for almost a half a century. The bottom line is that while there are some theological differences between the two, they're not that stark. 85% of the Muslims in the world are Sunni, 15% are Shiite. Historically, the Shiites have found themselves under the thumb, under the boot of the Sunnis, so there's no love lost between the two of them. Occasionally, you'll see marriages of convenience between Sunni and Shiites. For example, as counterintuitive as it sounds, Iran has tried to arm and help out Hamas, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Remember, there's no love lost between Sunnis and Shiites, and yet you will see sometimes that kind of cooperation. So I'm being asked the question that if a nuclear Iran is such an existential threat, why is Israel not willing to support the nuclear treaty, even though it did not cover other threats? Look, I think that the story and there were some significant figures within the defense establishment here in Israel that actually said, it's not the best deal, but it's okay, and we should be okay with it. That was not the way it was sold to the Israeli public, what I just said right now. Part of it has to do with the fact that it basically kicked the can down the road. It didn't stop Iran from creating a nuclear threat. It just deferred it to a later date. There's a sunset clause there, which means that you're only deferring it. That's number one. Number two, the stuff that it didn't cover, some of it was developing of the capacity to shoot the nuclear weapon. In other words, there's nothing in this thing that said they couldn't develop intercontinental ballistic missiles that could carry a nuclear payload, and so that was part of the Israeli criticism. Look, at this point now, it's not Israel that's actually stopped the U.S. from returning to the deal. As I think you're all aware, the Biden administration is speaking to Iran, but the Iranians are not coming through with some basic demands of the United States and the EU. So nothing seems to be moving on that. And this is not because of Israel at this point, to my knowledge. Under what scenario can I see Israel attacking Iran? I don't see a scenario of Israel attacking Iran. I don't think Israel has the capability to actually significantly damage the Iranian nuclear program. You have to understand that the Iranian nuclear program is in multiple sites. It's a very large country. It's deep, deep, deep under the ground. We don't have the munitions to take it out. The United States has what's known as bunker busters, which are basically bombs that can penetrate deep, deep, deep under the ground. Israel doesn't have those, or we don't have enough of them, and I don't really think we have the capacity of really taking out the nuclear program. Which is why, again, I think that at the end of the day, the Iranians will have a nuclear device. The only circumstance I can see of Israel attacking Iran is that Iran directly attacked Israel. Okay, in which case we do something like that, but I don't see a direct attack. Okay. So I don't see other questions here, but I will say the following. I will talk a little bit about what our turn to elections now and their relevance to the situation on the ground. So look, first of all, assuming we are heading for elections, the elections are going to take place either at the very end of October, beginning of November. In principle, I think they have to take place within 3 months of the collapse of the government. The government's going to collapse this Wednesday if they have their druthers. I think the earliest date would be the 25th of October. You also have a problem here of the holidays, the Jewish holidays. which is going to make it very difficult for the election board to get their act together. So maybe kicked a little bit down, the road, and maybe may end up being like the second week in November or something like that. In any event, it's not going to make that much of a difference vis-a-vis the tactical or strategic threats that are facing Israel right now. All the things I've been talking about up till now. We had to go through 4 elections to get to the government just collapsed after a year. It's not clear, and it's a long time ahead of us. In other words, it may seem like it's around the corner, but a lot of things can happen between now and then. But we may once again as prime minister. I will say the following, and that is that, at least on the face of things right now, and this could be erroneous, but on the face of things right now, if Netanyahu succeeds in forming a government, right now, when you do the math, the only way that could actually happen is if he'd have as a senior partner a very, very right-wing party that is deemed by many to be racist, misogynistic, and also anti-LGBTQ. So the polls now are showing something very interesting, that there's going to be a move of a fair amount of ultra-Orthodox who are going to vote for this right-wing settler racist party, which is going to give them a lot more seats than they had up till now. And that will be probably the only way that Netanyahu could actually form a government, if he could with them form a government. That's not abundantly clear either. So stay tuned. It's not clear what's going to happen. We have some time till it happens. Being asked a question about oil becoming less important. It's very hard to say right now what the ramifications are going to be. It's very clear that some of the Gulf states have gotten the memo. Even to a certain extent, Saudi Arabia as well. In other words, you are seeing that some of the Gulf states, Saudi Arabians, are trying to diversify their economies. They're trying to. They understand that at some point in the not distant future, oil is going to be much, much less important. They have the money now. Their populations, with the exception of Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, the populations are quite small. Saudi Arabia actually has a fairly significant population, about 35 million, but they realize they've got to do something else, and they're trying to shift. How well they're going to do that is another question entirely. Regarding Iran, I don't know of any kind of major shift they're doing over there. On the one hand, it's a fairly educated population. On the other hand, oil is their main income, and so they will certainly be adversely affected if they don't get their act together and move into something else. What change do I foresee having Lapid as prime minister? No, I don't see any changes. First of all, when you have a lame duck government, there are certain things the government can't do. There are appointments that it can't make. It'd be very difficult for it to make legislative changes because they don't have a majority. So they won't be able to pass any significant laws. I don't see the Lapid government making any significant changes as compared to what the government's done under Bennett. I think it's going to be more of the same. So, me a question off topic here. How is the Israeli economy in light of supply chain shortages, energy price rises, strength of the US dollar, caution about tourism? So the Israeli economy actually is doing very well. We had, I think, in 2022, the expectation is 6% growth, and I think 2023 is 4% growth. That's pretty darn good. I think the unemployment rate is 3.8% or 3.9%, also very good. We are, like everybody else, suffering somewhat from supply chain shortages. Energy prices have risen dramatically here as well. Keep in mind that in any good day of the week, when you didn't have the rise of energy prices in the States, it costs us twice here what it costs you there in the United States. I'll say that sentence again. Gas here costs any connection to the rise of prices now always costs twice here what it costs in the United States. Why? Because we all know that a price of a barrel of oil is determined in OPEC, okay? But how much you pay for gas, it has to do with federal and state, or probably more state in the United States. And in the context of Israel, it's the tariffs that Israel puts on the gas. So we get so taxed on our gas here that it's always twice what it costs you. So yes, we are hurting. Okay, it costs a lot of money to fill my car with gas. The US dollar has not really appreciated so much vis-a-vis the shekel. It's been very low for some time. For quite a long time, for over 10 years. And I know about that because I'm in the tourism industry and I suffer from that. So it hasn't changed dramatically. It's risen slightly, but not that dramatically. And regarding tourism, look, tourism was never a huge income from Israel. I'm saying as somebody who's in the tourism industry. It was never more than 3 or 4% maximum of the economy. At this point, the statistics are showing that since Israel opened the skies in February, we've gone back to 50% of what we had on the eve of Corona in 2019. And it's going to take quite a long time, probably years, for tourism to jump back here in Israel. I'll tell you why. Let's start with the oil prices, energy prices, which are high now because of the war between Russia and Ukraine, as you know. Think about how much it costs to gas up your car. It also costs a lot of money to gas up that plane. So tickets are getting more expensive because of the gas as well. So tickets are not cheaper, they're more expensive, number one. Number two, in Israel, because the tourism industry is totally linked to the dollar, and because the dollar has been so low as compared to the shekel, the hotels here have risen their prices. So you're spending a lot of money to stay in Israel in a hotel. So it costs a lot of money to fly here, a lot of money to stay over in a hotel here, and a lot of people are gonna vote with their feet. Why not? Or their pocketbook, whatever, not to come here until the prices go down. The bad news is that Israel is one of the top 10 most expensive countries in the world, which is insane. I live here, so I live this insanity. Just so you understand what this means, because this question was asked about the Israeli economy, we're at a point right now where the middle class is incapable of purchasing an apartment or a home in any of the cities, in the big cities. It's only possible if you go to the periphery, the geographic periphery. That's how crazy expensive it is. The housing prices keep going up and up and up. They rose 16% just this past year. They keep rising. And there's no end in sight. He asked the question, does the current government stay in power for a sixth election if the election does not result in a new majority coalition? Absolutely. That's exactly what happened with Bibi. And we had four elections, and Bibi was sitting there as a lame duck. How does the government function between the collapse and new elections? It's a lame duck government. It just steers the ship. Look, a 2-year budget was passed last year, so there's no issue about passing the budget. They can run the economy. They just can't. They run the economy, run the defense salary, do everything they have to do, but they can't. I would say they can't. They'll have difficulty passing any legislation. That having been said, the opposition was so much in the opposition. And this is, I'm sure, resonates to you as Americans. What goes on in the United States, in Congress and the Senate. But basically, there's a law that was going to expire at the end of this month, which is basically a regulation that has Israeli law, is the law of the land for the settlers, the Israelis who live over the Green Line, but not for the Palestinians. And that was going to expire. And the present government couldn't legislate it. The opposition, which is a right-wing opposition, just to, pardon me, screw the government, refused to, they shot down that legislation. And it's almost counterintuitive because you have settlers in the opposition, but they did it just on account of a cause. And you know, there's same thing in the States, in Congress and the Senate. It's very possible that when you have a lame duck government, the opposition will be more amenable because they may be, it won't matter for them. I don't overstate the case. They may be willing to allow some legislation to pass if it's something that needs to pass because it's a lame duck government anyway. But you know what? They also don't want to allow this government to have too many successes because that's part of the election campaign. So maybe I'm overstating the case, but they will function as much as they can function. I mean, ask how does the government function between the collapse and new elections? Netanyahu didn't function. Netanyahu did not pass a national budget for 3 years. Now, I know you have issues like that in the United States, but 3 years, we haven't had that before. And one of the big successes of the government that just collapsed now was they succeeded in passing a 2-year budget. And I can tell you horror stories what it means that the Netanyahu governments did not pass the budget. Everybody wants, I can tell you some horror stories about that, what it means on the ground. Do I see plane fares go up and down during the summer? Folks, I'm not an economist. My assessment is that so long as the war is going on in Ukraine and the gas prices are going insane, I assume that the tickets are going to be expensive because of that as well. Okay. Also due to the fact that the whole industry, the air industry, also took a big hit during 2 years of COVID, so they're trying to recoup that. All right. How does Gaza support itself? Gaza does not support itself. Gaza is being supported by Qatar. Qatar is giving them the money to stay not quite above the waterline, slightly below the waterline. Gaza Strip is a failed entity. It's not a state, but it's a failed entity. And by the way, let me just clarify it. Gaza, even if peace were to break out tomorrow morning, I'm saying this very seriously. If peace were to break out tomorrow morning, Gaza would have to fail. The carrying capacity doesn't meet the demographics. You have about 2.3 million people living in a very, very dense area with no energy resources, with not enough water resources to support those people as is, and no economic reason to be. I mean, you'd have to pour in, if there was peace, I don't know, billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars to artificially resuscitate Gaza. And that's if you had peace. And we don't have peace. So honestly, I don't see Gaza supporting itself anytime soon. Okay, last question. Bibi might get elected again. What do I think? So I tried very hard not to express my own personal opinion on all these sessions. I will state the following, however. I am of the opinion that when you have somebody who has 3 indictments hanging over his head, criminal indictments, that person should clear their name in a court of law before they run for office. That is my opinion. And I'll tell you what the model is for that. Ehud Olmert had also 2 or 3 indictments hanging over his head, less severe, by the way, than what Netanyahu has right now. In 2009, Olmert said, I cannot carry on as prime minister with these indictments over my head. I'm going to step down to clear my name. He went to court and he went to jail for 3 years because he was corrupt. That's some testicular fortitude, folks. I mean, to go in there when you know that you're corrupt and think you're going to get away with it, he didn't get away with it. But I am of the opinion that Netanyahu should not be running, but he's going to do it anyway. One also has to be cognizant of the fact that he's been attacking the judiciary ever since the indictments, and this is very dangerous for a democracy, particularly the Israeli democracy, because unlike the United States, where theoretically you have a triangle of checks and balances, meaning the executive, legislative, and judicial branches check and balance each other, in a parliamentary democracy like Israel, the executive branch sits in the legislative branch, has to have a majority there to function, which is really 2 against 1. And so a strong judiciary is important to balance, to have those checks and balances. Netanyahu has been trying very, very hard to weaken the judiciary. In fact, as head of the opposition, they tried to float legislation now to change the way the Supreme Court justices are appointed. I have to say that as is, it's a very unpoliticized system. It's one of the least politicized systems in the world, in the democratic world, and they want to make it even more politicized than when you have the United States. Okay, folks, I hope that you have enjoyed this series. It was a 10 meeting series. We may very well do something like this in the future. It's in my pleasure. And hopefully we'll see you guys when I come to Pittsburgh at some point in the future, or if you all come to Israel sometime in the future. Anyway, it's been my pleasure. Stay safe, stay COVID-free. FYI, I have COVID right now. Yeah, I'm going to tell you. But I'm getting over it really fast. In any event, it's been my pleasure. Stay healthy.
Thank you,
Keep up the
Avi.
faith.
This has been an amazing series, and we most certainly will return in the fall with something equally as compelling. As many of you know, CWB is returning at the end of this week to our study travel seminars, and as such, much of our virtual events will be on pause until early August. However, we still have many partner events on our website. I'm going to link in the chat to our new website, which we've just launched. It's a little bit easier to navigate. It's cwbpgh.org. You can view our events that are coming up, partner events over the summer, and you can also travel along with us via our travel blog. We hope that we'll see you all again soon. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay COVID-free, and we'll see you all at the beginning of the fall semester. Bye, everyone.